The word Baal means Lord, husband, or master. This was the main chief competitor that Satan used to get the Israelites to forsake God and worship this false god. In fact, Baal is simply Satan's disguise. If I establish Allah is simply another form for Baal and Islam is simply another form of Baal worship, then that actually further confirms Islam is the religion of the devil. It's Satan's religion that Satan inspired through Muhammad. Is Islam simply the religion of Baal, a form of Baal worship? Baal is the god of the moon. He's the moon god. Baal was the god of the Kaaba, the god of Mecca, the chief god. Baal was the idol from Syria. If Baal is from Syria and the chief god worshipped in Syria is Baal, we just established Baal is Baal. That means Baal was the chief god of Mecca, the chief god of the Kaaba, and Baal was then seen to be the moon god, the god of the moon. As you can see, the title is quite controversial. The Muslims are going to be upset, and I'm going to qualify. I'm not saying Muslims knowingly worship the false god Baal. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, if you're familiar with the Hebrew scriptures, you will note that the main competitor for the worship and allegiance of the Israelites was the false god Baal. All throughout the Old Testament, you'll find God chastening, disciplining, rebuking, punishing, even exiling his people for their habitual habit of turning to the false god Baal. That's all throughout the Old Testament. So the main competitor vying for the affection and love and devotion of the Israelites, Baal. Various pagans worship Baal. They also attached various descriptions to him, adjectives and functions. But just remember the word Baal. Now, focus with me, pay attention. The name Baal also pops up in the New Testament under the name Beelzebub. Beelzebub. If you read Mark 3, for instance, 22 all the way 30, the Jews accused Jesus of casting out demons by Beelzebub, the prince of demons. Beelzebub, or Beelzebul. Baal, that's the word Baal. Zebul means Lord of the flies, Lord of the house. Because the word Baal, I'm going to go slow here, trusting the Spirit to enable me to recall this information and interpret correctly. The word Baal means Lord, husband, or master. Okay. This was the main chief competitor that Satan used to get the Israelites to forsake God, their love for God, a devotion to God, and worship this false god. So Baal was the god that Satan used, the chief god. There were many gods and goddesses that Israel was enticed to worship to their shame and destruction and humiliation. But the chief god that Satan used to get Israel to worship something or someone other than Jehovah, was Baal. In fact, Baal is simply Satan's disguise. Because if you go with what the Jews said, Mark 3:22 to 30, if you go with the Jews, Beelzebub, Lord of the flies or Lord of the house, is the prince of demons. The prince of demons would be Satan. So here, if the Jews are right, and Jesus didn't correct them, he didn't correct them saying, no, you're wrong, Beelzebub is not the prince of the demons, the ruler of demons. That means Beelzebub, Baal, is simply another name of Satan. Simply another name of Satan. I just want to make sure you're getting this before we get into the meat. Because there's only one ruler of demons. There's only one ruler of demons, Satan. He rules the kingdom of darkness. All evil spirits are subject to him. So if Beelzebub or Beelzebul is the ruler of demons, then that means that's another name for Satan. Because Satan has various names. Satan, the devil, Belial, Beliar, right? He has various names, right? The serpent, the dragon, these are his names. That means Baal is simply Satan in disguise. Baal is simply Satan appearing as a god in order to mislead people from worshiping the true God. Now, if that's true, and the Bible indicates that's the case, Baal is simply Satan disguising himself as a god to lead people away from the worship of the true God. If that's true, then that means if I establish tonight by the sources and non-Muslim sources, and the non-Muslim sources are not hostile critics of Islam, but scholars of Islam and Islamic history. If I establish Allah is simply another form for Baal and Islam is simply another form of Baal worship, then that actually further confirms Islam is the religion of the devil. It's Satan's religion that Satan inspired through Muhammad to be the competitor against Judeo-Christianity. That would make sense, right? Because all throughout Old Testament history, the chief competitor to Yahweh, Yahovah, Baal. Right now, as we speak, the chief competitor, the chief religion competing for the devotion of the hearts and minds of not just the world, but of Jews and Christians is Islam. So it's like history repeating itself. As Solomon said in the book of Ecclesiastes, nothing new under the sun, the same lie, the same deceit, the same trickery being promoted throughout the ages, but under different disguises, repackaged. It's the same deceit, but repackaged, right? So just like during the Old Testament period, Baal was the chief antagonist of Yahovah, vying for the affection of the Jews, the Israelites. Now you have Baal again competing for the affections of believers, but under the guise of Islam, under the name of Allah. Is Islam simply the religion of Baal, a form of Baal worship? Let me now qualify what I'm saying. There's a caveat. That doesn't mean the Muslims knowingly worship Baal. That doesn't mean Muslims know they're worshiping Baal. That's the deception. That's a deceit. Just like when the Israelites worshiped Baal, they didn't think they were worshiping Satan. What do you think jihad is if it's not human sacrifice for Allah? One of the chief pillars in spreading Islam is jihad, human sacrifice. Just like the Israelites did not think they were worshiping Satan when they worshiped Baal. Did they think they were worshiping Satan? When they worshiped Baal, or they worshiped Astarte, Ashtar, or they worshiped Eel's consort Asherah, do you think they thought that they were worshiping Satan and demons, evil spirits? Even though the Israelites did not think they were worshiping demons, Satan and demons, when they worshiped the gods and goddesses of the nations, Baal. In some places, Baal was the chief god. In other places, they knew he was the son of Eel. And guys, I'm sorry, I don't mean to insult dogs. Dogs are beautiful creatures, and they tend to be more loyal than human beings. And I don't mean to insult filthy dogs, because a filthy dog, you can give it a bath and it'll be clean. But these demons, unless they repent and turn to Jesus Christ, they'll stay filthy. Only Jesus can cleanse them. Deuteronomy 32:16-17. Talking about the Israelites, they provoked him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations provoked him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers fear not. Did you catch it? The Israelites were sacrificing to devils, to demons, though that's not what they thought they were doing. Muslims don't think they're worshiping Baal. They think they're worshiping the true God of Abraham, and that's the deceit of Satan. Satan doesn't care whether you're worshiping him or not. In fact, he doesn't care whether you acknowledge he exists or not. He doesn't even care if you're an atheist. He just doesn't want you to know the true God and the true gospel, because that's the only way you can escape him and overcome him, right? So here are the three facts I want to establish. Facts that either the sources themselves come out and say, or facts that are derived from what these sources are saying. What they call the natural inference, the necessary inference, the conclusion of what they're saying. Okay, here are the three facts. And this is all in my articles. Fact number one, Hubal. Hubal was the chief deity, the chief god of Mecca and of the shrine, the Kaaba. That's the first fact. Fact number two, Hubal was actually Baal. Hubal, and the Muslim sources will testify, was actually the Arabic name for Baal. Some people believe Hubal either comes from Hubal, he is Baal, two Arabic words, or it is an Arabicized corruption of the Hebrew words Ha-Baal, the Baal. Some people will tell you that Hubal is either Arabic for who, he, is Baal, or it's the Arabic corruption of Ha-Baal. The two Hebrew words Ha-Baal means the Baal. Okay, that's the second fact. The third fact, Hubal was Al-Hubal. If you actually read, quote unquote, between the lines, you're going to see Hubal was Allah, Allah was Hubal. I want to give you a little background on the pagan religion in Mecca. Mecca, that's Arabia. Mecca, according to the Muslim sources, is the place where Muhammad was born. He belonged to the Quraysh tribe, which was an Arab tribe that lived in Mecca. And according to the Muslim sources, the Meccans were into astral worship. Astral worship. Now explain what astral worship means. Like other ancient civilizations, they associated the planets and the sun and moon with their gods and goddesses. I'm quoting the late Abdullah Yusuf Ali in his translation of the Quran, which I quote. He admits that the Arabs before Muhammad and during the time Muhammad were into astral worship, where they worshiped the sun and moon and 5 planets because they thought there were only 5 planets. Now let's do the math. Sun, moon, 5 planets, that's 7, right? Follow with me. That's 7, right? Sun and moon and 5 planets. That's 7. In many cultures, the sun was the male deity and the moon was the female deity. The sun was the male deity and the moon was the female consort, the female deity. Not in Arabia. In Arabia, the moon was the male deity and the sun was the female deity. And the sun was the consort, the wife of the moon. Let me just read what Abdullah Yusuf Ali says. I can't read all of it. Let me read what he says. This is a Muslim. Now, he's passed away, but he admits this. To revert to the worship of the heavenly bodies, a few individual stars did attract the worshippers' attention, e.g. Sirius. The Arabs worship Sirius, the dog star, the brightest fixed star in the heavens with a blush tinge in its light. It is probably Sirius that is referred to as the fixed star in the parable of Abraham. With regard to the fixed stars and their myriads, the astronomers turned their fancy to devising groups or constellations. Now, here's where it's going to get relevant, okay? But the moving stars are planets, each with a motion and therefore will or influence of its own. As they knew and understood them, they were 7 in number. That's what they thought, 7. And now he tells you what the 7 are. 1 and 2, the moon and the sun. So count. The 2 objects which most indubitably influence the tides, the temperatures, and the life in our planet. 3 and 4, the 2 inner planets, Mercury and Venus. So that's 4 so far, Mercury and Venus, which are morning and evening stars and never travel far from the sun. 5, 6, and 7, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The outer planets whose elongation from the sun on the ecliptic can be as wide as possible. The number 7 itself is a mystical number as explained in note 5526. Okay, now notice what he's going to say. It will be noticed that the sun and the moon and the 5 planets got identified, these planets in total, sun and moon and the 5 planets, they got identified, associated with, each with a living deity, god or goddess, with characteristics and qualities of its own. This is a Muslim whose Quran translation was widely circulated and distributed in the 20th century. Okay, did you see what he just said? The Arabs in Mecca, in Arabia, but in Mecca, worship the sun and moon and 5 planets as 7 gods and goddesses. 7, right? The Arabic word for the moon, qamar, is of the masculine gender. And on the other hand, the Arabic word for the sun, shams, is of the feminine gender. The pagan Arabs evidently looked upon the sun as a goddess and the moon as a god. So the Arabs in Mecca, Arabia in general, but Mecca specific because that's where Muhammad was born. They viewed the moon as the male god and the sun as the female god, or the goddess. Okay, folks, let me bring out the implication. The sources teach that the Kaaba in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, was a shrine that housed 360 idols. This is in the Muslim sources. It's not non-Muslim sources. 360 idols, okay, which Muhammad eventually destroyed. Okay. The Muslim sources also admit the pagans before Muhammad would perform what they call the rites of pilgrimage, right? Hajj and Umrah, meaning they would come to the Kaaba, and those who lived there didn't need to travel. The Kaaba, that cube building that's been rebuilt on more than one occasion in Mecca, and the pagans would run around it 7 times. Something Muslims do to this day. Muslims adopted these practices from the pagans. Muslims, like the pagans before them, would run 7 times. And then there are 2 hills in Mecca called Safa and Marwa, and they'd run between these hills 7 times. And the Muslim sources say that at one time there were 2 idols on both hills. There was an idol here and an idol there, and they'd run 7 times. Now, folks, can I ask you a question? Why did the pagans run 7 times between the 2 hills, Safa and Marwa, and run around the Kaaba 7 times? Practices which Islam adopted, Muhammad observed, and Muslims continue to this day. But why did the pagans do it? Why did the pagans do it? Why did they do it? They did it in worship of the gods and goddesses, the 7 planetary deities. Why in the world did Muhammad continue that practice? And why are Muslims running around the Kaaba 7 times and between the two hills 7 times? All of which, even the Muslim sources admit, were practices that the pagans observed because they believed in the sun and moon and 5 planets as god and goddesses that they had to worship and venerate. Why are the Muslims still doing it? You know what their excuse is? You want to hear their silly excuse? Oh, because Ishmael settled in Mecca and Abraham came and visited Ishmael, and Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba as the first house of worship. And so Ishmael taught them these practices, but as time went on, his descendants corrupted these practices and then attached them to gods and goddesses. So originally it was practices done for Yahovah, the worship of Jehovah. But then the descendants of Ishmael corrupted themselves, became idolaters, and then corrupted the practices and attached them to their gods and goddesses. Are you buying it? Are you buying that version of history? Does it make sense? And is it a coincidence that Ishmael told them, hey, run between the two hills 7 times, run around the Kaaba 7 times, and somehow, magically, 7 becomes the number of the gods and goddesses that the pagans worship because they thought there were 5 planets and the sun and the moon. Gee, what a coincidence. Let alone, all this archaeological evidence refutes the claim that Ishmael went to Mecca. Because if you believe in your Bible, Genesis 21:21, it says Ishmael settled in the wilderness of Paran, and Paran is around Egypt and Canaan. It's not in Mecca. And Genesis 21:21 says that Ishmael married an Egyptian because his mother Hagar was from Egypt and she got him a wife from Egypt. So he never settled in Mecca and he didn't marry an Arab woman and sired the Arabs in Mecca. That's Genesis 21:21. So at least we can know and confirm, and the Muslims agree, this much. This much the Muslims admit. The pagans were doing these things, running around the Kaaba 7 times and between 2 hills 7 times, and there was an idol on each side of the hill. And the pagans thought the sun and moon and the 5 planets were gods and goddesses. So at least the Muslims admit that much. Yeah, that's what they believed, and they did it for the gods and goddesses. That means everything else is nothing but fantasy, fairy tale. The Ishmael and the Abraham story. That is fantasy, fairy tale. But the Muslims are admitting that that other part of the story, that the pagans observed these practices long before Muhammad, and Muhammad was observing them, even when the house was steeped with 360 idols, that part they at least admit. Remember what the source just stated? I just read Abdullah Yusuf Ali. He said to the Arabs, the moon, the Arabic word qammar, is masculine, denoting the fact that the Arabs viewed the moon as the male deity, meaning it was the planet, the astral object associated with the chief deity. The Arabs are what they call patriarchal society, meaning the male is the chief. So their god has to be male. He's the chief. The moon is the planet representing the chief male deity of their pantheon. The sun is the female. The sun represents the female, the goddess, that's the wife of the male deity. Okay, now folks, the moon is the male deity because it's the planet associated with the chief god of the pantheon, the chief god worshipped by the Arab pagans and a host of gods and goddesses, and the chief god is male. So the moon, Qammar, that's a masculine now, so it's associated with the male deity who's the chief. But hold on, the chief deity is supposed to be Allah. The chief deity is supposed to be Allah. He's the chief deity, he's the male deity. Well, if the moon was viewed as masculine, and it's the male deity or the object associated with the male deity, that means you just established that for the pagans, Allah was the moon god. Oh my goodness. Did you get it? I'm now going to confirm what I just said. That if you read the sources carefully and connect the dots, then the necessary logical conclusion and inference from what they're saying is this. Allah was the name of Hubal. Hubal is the moon god. And Hubal is actually the idol Baal, Mecca's chief deity. The chief god of Mecca, the god of the Kaaba, the chief god of the pagans in Mecca was Hubal. This is what the sources say. So are you ready now? Okay, this comes from Gods, Goddesses, and Mythology, Volume 11, page 137. Hubal, chief god of the Kaaba, a martial and oracular deity, a moon god. What was Hubal? A moon god. Oh my goodness. Who was the chief god of Mecca, of the Kaaba, of the shrine? Hubal. And Hubal was the moon god. Are you seeing it? Let's read another one. This comes from Cyril Glasse, and this comes from the New Encyclopedia of Islam. The New Encyclopedia of Islam, page 209. Hubal, an idol, the god of the moon. An idol, the god of the moon. Pay attention to this name. Centuries before Islam, Amr ibn Luhay, a chief of the tribe of Jurhum who dwelt in Mecca, before the coming of the Quraysh tribe, brought the idol to the city from Syria. Wow. We're going to revisit that, but let me finish it. It was set up in the Kaaba and became the principal idol of the pagan Meccans. Folks, do you understand the implication of what we just read? Hubal was an idol from Syria. An Arab named Amr ibn Luhay brought the idol from Syria to Mecca, and Hubal became the chief god of Mecca. The chief god in Syria among the pagans was Baal. Baal was the god that was worshipped by the Syrians before the time of Muhammad. If this Arab, Amr, brought the idol from Syria, what was he bringing to the Kaaba? The idol of Baal, before Muhammad. So he brought the idol Baal from Syria, and that's why it's called Hubal, from Syria, the Syrians. Notice Hubal became the chief god of the Kaaba of Mecca. So you understand what the sources just admit? Hubal is the god of the moon. He's the moon god. Hubal was the god of the Kaaba, the god of Mecca, the chief god. Hubal was the idol from Syria. These three facts are admitted explicitly by the sources. So now let's break it down. If Hubal is from Syria and the chief god worshipped in Syria is Baal, we just established Hubal is Baal. That means Baal was the chief god of Mecca, the chief god of the Kaaba, and Baal was then seen to be the moon god, the god of the moon. Hubal was pulled down and used as a doorstep when the Prophet conquered Mecca and purified the Kaaba. Again, this is Encyclopedia of Islam, and it says Hubal, a pre-Islamic deity represented by an idol in Kaaba that was destroyed by Muhammad when he conquered Mecca in 630. Patron of the Quraysh. Muhammad's tribe is the Quraysh tribe. What does patron of the Quraysh mean? It means the chief god of this tribe. That was their patron god. That was their chief god. So who was the chief god of the Quraysh? To whom did the Quraysh look? Who do they look to as their chief god? Hubal. What tribe was Muhammad born from? Quraysh. So who was the chief god of Muhammad's family, of Muhammad's tribe, of Muhammad? Hubal. Who is Hubal? Baal. Muhammad was born in Baal worship. Baal.